A warning to our viewers. What you're about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
A man convicted of kidnapping, raping, and murdering a college student may have his sentence reduced. The 1982 case against Jerry Beatty has been reopened. Our Lee Zhang is at the Anne Arundel Courthouse with this report.
A convicted rapist and murderer in one of the most notorious cases in Maryland history could be released early under a 2021 law that bans children and teens from spending the rest of their lives in prison.
In 1982, 22-year-old Stephanie Roper was on her way home when her car broke down on a rural road in Prince George's County. She never made it home. Defendants Jack Jones and Jerry Beatty were later convicted of kidnapping, raping, and murdering the college senior before dismembering her and setting her body on fire.
April 3rd, 1982. A remote stretch of road in Prince George's County, Maryland. The smell hit the investigators first. Charred flesh. Gasoline. A putrid stench that would cling to their clothes for weeks. Then they saw what was left of her. Burned beyond recognition, hands severed to prevent identification. The kind of calculated brutality that makes hardened detectives question humanity itself. But Jerry Beatty had made one fatal mistake. He couldn't stop bragging about what he and his partner had done to the 22-year-old college student they'd found stranded on this very road just hours before. What started as a simple car breakdown had turned into a night of unimaginable torture in an abandoned shack deep in the Maryland woods. And when Stephanie Roper accidentally learned one of their names, her fate was sealed. This wasn't just murder. This was a crime so brutal, so shocking, it would rewrite American law forever. This is the story of Stephanie Roper. Welcome to the Shadow Files crime series. Tonight's case will shake you to your core. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now, we begin. Spring 1982. America is caught between two worlds. Ronald Reagan's optimism fills the airwaves. Morning in America, they call it. But in the shadows, a different reality is taking hold. Across the nation, violent crime is spiking. The FBI reports that a murder occurs every 23 minutes. Serial killers, like the Green River Killer, are hunting in the Pacific Northwest. In Atlanta, children are disappearing from their neighborhoods. The golden age of the suburban dream is cracking, and nowhere feels truly safe anymore. In rural Maryland, this new fear creeps along country roads that have connected farming communities for generations. Prince George's County, a patchwork of small towns, tobacco farms, and endless stretches of dark asphalt where a broken-down car means you're truly alone. And if the unthinkable happened to you or someone you loved, the justice system had a brutal message: you don't matter. Victims' families were legal ghosts. No right to speak, no right to know, no right to be heard. The courts served everyone except those who needed them most. 22 years old in the spring of 1982, Stephanie Roper embodied everything hopeful about her generation. Born and raised in Croom, Maryland, a farming community where Friday night high school football still mattered and everyone knew their neighbors' first names. Her father, Vincent, built houses with his hands. Her mother, Roberta, kept the family grounded with Sunday dinners and unwavering moral principles. They raised Stephanie to believe that hard work, kindness, and faith could overcome any obstacle. At Frostburg State University, Stephanie was training to become an elementary school teacher, not because the pay was good, but because she genuinely believed she could change lives. Her professors noted her natural ability to connect with children who struggled, her patience with those who needed extra help. Friends remember her infectious laugh. She carried a camera everywhere, capturing moments others missed, documenting a world she genuinely loved. She volunteered at literacy programs during breaks, helping adults learn to read, work that paid nothing but meant everything to her. That spring, she'd fallen in love. Close friends whispered about post-graduation plans, maybe an engagement ring. Her journal from those weeks overflows with excitement about the future. Graduate school. maybe the Peace Corps, definitely a classroom full of eager young minds. On April 3, 1982, Stephanie was home on college break, excited about an evening with friends in Washington, D.C. She'd just received glowing evaluations from her student teaching supervisor. Life was exactly where it should be. She kissed her parents goodbye that evening, promising to drive carefully on the dark country roads between D.C. and home. She had no idea that in the darkness of Prince George's County, two predators were already on the hunt, waiting for someone exactly like her to need help. Every monster has an origin story. Jerry Lee Beatty's began with tragedy and spiraled into something far worse. Born in 1965, Jerry's childhood shattered when his mother died. He was just 12 years old. What should have been grief became a nightmare. His father's response wasn't comfort, but rage, physical abuse, emotional torture. By 14, Jerry was living on the streets, surviving however he could. But childhood trauma doesn't excuse what came next, because at 17, Jerry Beatty crossed paths with Ronald Jones, 26 years old, 9 years his senior, and everything Jerry thought he wanted to become. Jones was a predator who'd been perfecting his craft. Court records would later reveal a pattern of escalating violence, petty theft evolving into assault building towards something much darker. He saw in the homeless teenager exactly what he needed. Someone desperate enough to follow orders, young enough to manipulate, damaged enough not to question his methods. In the weeks leading up to April 3, 1982, Batty had been living with Jones, learning from him. The older man was teaching the younger one that people were objects to be used, that power came from inflicting pain, that the world owed them whatever they could take. They'd already committed crimes together, breaking and entering, theft, assault. Each success made them bolder. Each victim who didn't fight back made them hungrier for someone who would. That night they were prowling the dark roads of Prince George's County looking for opportunity. What they found was a young woman whose only mistake was trusting that strangers might actually want to help. April 3, 1982, Saturday night in Washington, D.C. Stephanie and her friends head to the 21st Amendment, a popular bar in the West End where college students went to blow off steam. For Stephanie, it was pure celebration. Her student teaching evaluations had been stellar. Graduation was just weeks away. Life felt limitless, full of possibility. Around midnight, the group called it a night. Stephanie offered to drive her friend home to Brandywine, Maryland, a 30-minute detour, but that was Stephanie, always putting others first. After dropping her friend off safely, Stephanie began the familiar drive back to Croom along Route 4, the same road she'd traveled hundreds of times. Dark country highway, flanked by dense woods and the occasional farmhouse. Then, disaster. Her car began to sputter, lose power. In 1982, there were no cell phones, no GPS, no way to call for help. Just you, your car, and whatever stranger might happen to drive by. Stephanie managed to pull over near a crossroads, a desolate stretch where the darkness seemed to swallow everything beyond the reach of her headlights. She was completely alone, completely vulnerable. That's when she saw the headlights approaching, two men in a beat-up car, slowing down, pulling over. In the moment that would haunt investigators for decades, Stephanie made the choice that anyone would make. She trusted them. Jones and Jerry Beatty stepped out of their car offering help with practiced smiles, but the moment Stephanie relaxed, the moment she let her guard down, Jones pulled a gun. They forced her into their vehicle at gunpoint, leaving her disabled car behind like a gravestone on the dark road. Destination: an abandoned shack deep in the woods of St. Mary's County, miles from anywhere, miles from anyone who could hear her scream. What happened in that isolated shack over the next several hours represents some of the most brutal violence in Maryland's criminal history. Stephanie was tortured, raped repeatedly, beaten with a logging chain that investigators would later find stained with her blood. For hours, she endured unimaginable suffering at the hands of two men who had completely abandoned their humanity. But even in hell, Stephanie fought. Court records document multiple escape attempts, each one proof of her incredible courage, her refusal to surrender, even when hope seemed impossible. She was a teacher, trained to protect children, and that protective instinct extended to herself. Then came the moment that sealed her fate. In their twisted excitement, one of the men called the other by his first name. Stephanie now knew their identity. She could identify them. Jones and Beatty realized their mistake. As long as Stephanie lived, she was a witness who could destroy them. The decision to kill her was calculated, cold-blooded, not committed in the heat of passion, but as a deliberate choice to save themselves. They fractured her skull with the logging chain. They shot her to death, but even that wasn't enough. Determined to prevent identification, they burned her body with gasoline and severed her hands. By dawn on April 4th, Stephanie Elizabeth Roper, honor student, future teacher, beloved daughter, was gone. But evil, no matter how calculated, is ultimately stupid. Jerry Beatty, the same broken boy who had learned that violence was power, couldn't resist the ultimate display of that power, bragging about what he'd done. Within days of the murder, Beatty was telling others about the young woman they'd killed. Each boast was another nail in their coffin, another piece of evidence that would lead police straight to their door. The discovery came on April 4th, less than 24 hours after Stephanie's murder. A passerby noticed something burning in the woods near the abandoned shack in St. Mary's County. What investigators found defied their worst expectations. Stephanie's burned remains, mutilated beyond recognition, the logging chain still nearby, stained with evidence of unthinkable violence. Even veteran detectives struggled to process the scene. But Jerry Beatty's fatal flaw, his need to boast about the power he'd wielded, became their breakthrough. Within days, multiple witnesses came forward. Beatty had been bragging to anyone who would listen about what he and Jones had done to some college girl. The arrests came swiftly. Both men were charged with kidnapping, rape, and felony murder. The evidence was overwhelming, not just physical, but Beatty's own words condemning them both. Justice, it seemed, would be swift and certain. Jones was convicted by jury in Baltimore County, while Beatty pleaded guilty to the same charges in Anne Arundel County. Both courts imposed 2 concurrent life sentences with parole eligibility after 24 years. But Jones would never serve his full sentence. He took his own life in prison, robbing the Roper family of any chance for him to face their questions, to understand the full impact of his crimes, or to show any semblance of accountability. Vincent and Roberta Roper had lost their daughter in the most horrific way imaginable. Now they were about to discover that their legal system would inflict a second trauma almost as devastating as the first. When Jack Jones went to trial in Baltimore County, the Roper family was told they couldn't observe the proceedings. They were witnesses, the court explained, and witnesses wait in the hallway. The fact that they were the victim's parents was legally irrelevant. They weren't notified when court dates changed. When plea negotiations happened behind closed doors, they learned about it from newspaper reporters. When sentencing approached, they were told their voices didn't matter. The state spoke for their daughter now, not them. The final insult came at sentencing. Both Jones and Beatty received 2 concurrent life sentences with parole eligibility after 24 years. The Roper family, the people who knew Stephanie best, who loved her most, who had carried this pain forever, were given no opportunity to tell the court what her life had meant, what her death had cost. Vincent and Roberta sat in that courtroom, surrounded by lawyers and officials who treated their daughter's murder as a legal exercise, her life reduced to evidence exhibits. They realized with crushing clarity that in America's justice system, victims' families were legal ghosts, present but powerless, grieving but ignored. Most families would have retreated into private grief, overwhelmed by trauma and legal powerlessness. Vincent and Roberta Roper chose revolution. In 1982, they founded the Stephanie Roper Committee, initially just 2 grieving parents and a folding table in their living room. Their mission was simple but radical: give victims' families a voice in the justice system that claimed to serve them. Word spread. Other families emerged from the shadows: parents, spouses, children of murder victims who had been silenced by the same system. What started as a support group became a movement. What began as grief became a force for change. By 2004, their work had reached the highest levels of government. The Crime Victims' Rights Act, federal legislation named partially for Stephanie Roper, granted victims' families rights that seemed impossible in 1982: the right to be heard at sentencing, the right to be notified of proceedings, the right to have their voices matter. For over 40 years, Roberta Roper has led this fight. Now in her 80s, she has transformed the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center into a lifeline, serving thousands of families each year. The organization provides legal advocacy, counseling, and something the Ropers never had: a voice in their own justice system. Today, Stephanie's name appears on highway signs across Maryland. The Stephanie Ann Roper Gallery graces her university campus. The Roper Victim Assistance Academy trains advocates nationwide. But her greatest monument isn't carved in stone. It's written in law, spoken in courtrooms where victims' families finally have the right to be heard. 42 years after Stephanie Roper's murder, Jerry Beatty sits in a Maryland courtroom once again. Now 59 years old, gray-haired and wearing the demeanor of a reformed man, he's seeking something that seemed impossible in 1982: freedom.
Jones was 26, but Batty was only 17 at the time. Both were sentenced to life in prison. It was a reality Batty faced until the Juvenile Restoration Act passed 3 years ago. Defendants who were convicted under the age of 18 are now eligible for release after serving at least 20 years in prison.
There are crimes for which, when a person commits them, they should never see the light of day, and this is one of them.
Advocates like Kurt Wolfgang, the executive director of the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center, strongly oppose Batty's release, citing the, quote, horrific nature of the crime and the potential harmful effects on victims. State's Attorney Scott Schellenberger of Baltimore County opposed the bill.
There just needs to be a point in time where I can say to a victim, it's over. And unfortunately, you can't do that here in the state of Maryland.
In 2021, Maryland passed the Juvenile Restoration Act, legislation allowing those convicted as minors to petition for sentence reductions after serving 20 years. Beatty was 17 when he tortured and murdered Stephanie. Under this new law, he qualifies for consideration. His defense presents a compelling narrative: childhood trauma, decades of rehabilitation, a bachelor's degree earned behind bars, genuine Christian faith, testimonials from fellow inmates and correctional officers who swear he's a changed man.
To the victim's family, first of all, I want to say he's not the same person. Secondly, I want to say that he still feels a lot of regret about what he did, but there's nothing he can do about it.
8 witnesses testified on his behalf, calling him a low risk for future violence. But sitting in that same courtroom is Roberta Roper, now over 80 years old, her hair white with the weight of 4 decades of advocacy. She has forgiven Beatty, she tells the court, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean ignoring accountability. We were shut out of the trial, she reminds the court, her voice steady despite the years. We felt cheated when Jones took his own life. I longed for the day there would be a parole hearing, for Beatty to understand the impact of his choices on our family and community. The courtroom battle over Jerry Beatty's freedom represents questions that have haunted humanity since justice was first conceived. When is enough punishment truly enough? Can someone who committed such evil truly be reformed? And who has the right to make that determination? Beatty's supporters argue that keeping a 59-year-old man in prison for crimes committed at 17 serves no purpose beyond vengeance. Victims' advocates counter that some crimes are so heinous they forfeit any claim to mercy, regardless of the perpetrator's age. But perhaps the most important question isn't about Beatty at all. It's about who speaks for Stephanie Roper in that courtroom. Who represents the dreams she never fulfilled, the children she never taught, the family she never raised? The answer is written in the very laws that allow Roberta Roper to stand before that court and be heard. In 1982, she had no voice. Today, because of Stephanie's legacy, Victims' families across America can speak truth to power, can demand accountability, can ensure that justice remembers not just the perpetrator's humanity, but the victims as well. Whether Jerry Beatty walks free or dies in prison, one thing remains certain. Stephanie Roper's voice echoes in every courtroom where a victim's family stands to speak. Her death sparked a revolution that continues to this day, ensuring that the silenced are finally heard. Today, when victims' families stand in courtrooms across America to address their loved one's killer before sentencing, they exercise a right that simply didn't exist before April 3, 1982. Stephanie Roper's name graces highway signs and university galleries, but her greatest monument isn't carved in stone or cast in bronze. It's written in human voices that refuse to be silenced. Every time a grieving mother faces her child's killer and says, "This is who you destroyed," Stephanie's legacy lives on. Every time a father demands accountability before sentencing, her spirit stands with him, because sometimes the most profound way to honor the dead is to ensure the living never suffer in silence again.
The last time I saw Stephanie, she was going out the garage, and I went out with her, and the last thing she said to me were, "Do these socks look okay, Mom?" And I said, "Sure, they're fine." And she said, "I really have to clean up this car tomorrow," because she had piled in a bunch of her stuff from school. And I said, "Have a good time, have fun, and give me a call if you're going to be later than I expect you." And she said, "Goodbye."